It's the 19th of February, 2025. Coming up on today's Global Intelligence Agency Operations Report. As the Trump Organization sends out executive orders like water from a fire hose, do they really understand how the world works? It's obvious they don't, because if they did, they would never have sent out an executive order on Tuesday night that demands all intelligence agencies are now to report to the White House, including the DIA. Also late Tuesday evening, the secret space program operatives crossed the line from Duluth, Minnesota, as they attempt to use old systems to try and reverse the golden light of source. And the Universal Network is clearing everything in its path to make way for the new. Well, it is the 19th of February, and that mid-month bump has hit an all-time high. I kind of laugh about this a little bit because there is so much more to the world than we have ever been told. And I learn new things every day. Some of this I've known for a while, and some of the things that they are trying to do have already been, well, swung in our favor. And there were different things that we have done over the course of the last few years. And at the time, it seemed like, well, why do we have to do this now? Okay, well, this is important. So, and of course, source makes me look smart. I say that all the time because the wisdom comes at the right time and not a moment before. And sometimes we do things that I don't fully, I'm like, why is this so urgent? Why am I being woken up at 1 o'clock in the morning to do this right now? And it's an urgent message that comes through. There's an alarm that goes off or something like that. And, then I have to take care of what I have to take care of. And on good days, sometimes I can go back to sleep for a short period of time. And, well, on days like today, that really wasn't the case. So let's talk about what is going on right now as far as our world as we know it. And this is kind of, I guess you would say, behind the scenes, regular news. So we're going to start with that. There's going to be a lot of talk in this report about the legal system, legalities as it relates to governments, and monetary policy, let's just say. Some of it, if you've been around for a while, you might have gotten some snippets of it before. And I've mentioned a few things here and there. And I have a tremendous amount of notes for this report. So you're going to hear a lot of paper shuffling and and probably a little bit of reading, because it's easier for me to read from my notes in this particular case. So it's a lot to remember for one report. So sit back, grab a cup of coffee, cup of tea, depending on what time you are listening to this, and enjoy all the information because, we got a lot to say today. Okay, so last night, and pretty much for the last few weeks, I guess it's been almost a month now since we've had a new administration in the United States, or an old administration, I guess you would say. And this administration seems like they are firing out executive orders like we don't even have a Congress, and there is no Senate, and definitely not any kind of House of Representatives or anything like that. And it appears that they kind of stepped in one today, or last night, I should say, of a misconception as to how the world really works. And I think a lot of you might have received a lot of misinformation as it relates to our Constitution. There's a lot of people that say restore the Constitution, and how government really worked as far as the legal aspect and the financial aspect, and why I say the Trump operatives don't appear to be too educated, or maybe they just don't care as to how global treaties work and those types of things. So we're going to go over a lot of legal information, I guess you would say tonight, based on an executive order that was, I guess, passed through. Nobody seems to care if anything is ratified these days. But there was some information that came in that I'm going to share because it's kind of silly, actually. So apparently an executive order went out last night that all intelligence agencies are now going to be under the control of the Office of the President and or the White House. A call was placed to a GIA agent, Mr. Melville, and he was told that the GIA is now going to be under the White House. After about 5 minutes of hysterical laughing, as this message was passed to me, I said they've basically lost their mind. Technically, the U.S. government doesn't actually have an intelligence agency. Most of the intelligence agencies always reported to a different organization. Second oaths were taken. Oaths that eventually got passed all the way to the ultimate oath, which had nothing to do with humans and the organizations that they represented, and so on and so forth throughout the universe. Same kind of goes for our legal system. And by legal system, you would know it as an average everyday person as, well, I go to court, I file documents, that type of thing. And while that does exist, it is not the same as the legal system that governments need to adhere to. It is not the same as the legal system of Earth. It is also not the same system that the Order of the Dragon or the Order of the Black Sun had to adhere to. And it went up in rank from there to off-world legalities, for lack of a better term, and covenants and things that went, or agreements or covenants that went very, very deep. So the thought process of trying to reassign intelligence agencies to a government is kind of funny. What's even worse than that is, to the average everyday American, this looks normal. It looks like, wow, look at the guy take charge. And even amongst those that work in the White House who relayed said information, it appeared to them that they're now in charge. They begin to call intelligence agencies like DARPA and other, the CIA, Homeland Security, and started swinging a bat, as the Trump operatives and Duck Dynasty often do, without even thinking about how the world really works. And, there's a lot of scuttlebutt, so let's just say all around the internet, about UCC law, sovereign man syndrome, liens on the government, birth certificate liens, and all of these types of things, which sounds all fine and good and would make sense if you're not looking at the bigger picture. So tonight we're going to talk a lot about the bigger picture. And the picture goes, it's a really big, big picture. It's actually a universal picture. And this is something that the secret space program operatives, aka the Trump operatives, do not understand. They are misleading nations around the world with their blah, blah, for lack of a better term, without saying a swear word. And it's time we set the record straight a little bit as to how we got to where we are and where do we really sit. The other thing the Trump operatives are doing is they are attempting to do asset recalls. They are under the firm impression that the United States assigned assets to other countries, such as Saudi Arabia, and this point was brought up during the meeting between the United States, Russia, and Saudi Arabia most recently, where both parties are under the impression they had a significant amount of assets to discuss. And truth be told, none of that is actually the case. They have some old documentation that they think is legit, whereby certain countries and governments were owning certain assets even within their land mass, known as their country. And that is simply not the case. Global control systems ran deep, and it goes far beyond the Rothschild family, Order of the Dragon, and the secret space program operatives, and little knowledge is dangerous. So let's talk about what we think, or what appears to be the case, from face front. If you have ever heard of something called the Unitary executive theory, this appears to be something that has been attempted before, a long time ago with Dick Cheney. It's actually featured as or I shouldn't say featured, it's mentioned a few times throughout the movie Vice, in which supposedly tells the story of Dick Cheney. And we all know Dick Cheney was part and pretty high up in the Order of the Black Sun for quite some time there. And what the Unitary executive theory actually is, per the internet and per information that it appears that the Trump operatives are going off of, is that it is a constitutional law theory. So this is kind of the gray area in constitutional law. Now, for those of you that have ever read the Constitution, you'll understand it talks predominantly not about you as citizens of the United States or America, depending, and I wouldn't use those words interchangeably. But it talks mainly about the executive branch. It talks about government. It talks about government overreach. It talks about national emergencies and the powers of the president during national emergencies, and how the president is appointed and who qualifies to be president, and that type of thing. It doesn't really talk about you. I know people say, let's restore the Constitution, but have you read the Constitution? Because it doesn't have anything to do with you as people. I'm not sure how that's going to give you any rights unless you decide you're going to run for president or Congress or any other branch of government. So with that being said, the Unitary executive theory basically says that the president has authority over the executive branch of government. It is, and I quote, an expansive interpretation of presidential power that aims to centralize greater control over government, end quote. Again, quite a gray area there. Declaring a national emergency gives the president allegedly power of the pen, that type of thing. So since executive orders are flying around all over the place, and there seems to be a lot of confusion, let's talk about what this actually would mean in theory if we were looking at government as individual nations, which it is not. So the executive branch actually encompasses 15 government departments. Those departments are as follows: the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Defense, the Department of Education, the Department of Energy, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Interior, the Department of Justice, the Department of Labor, the Department of State or State Department, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Treasury, and the Department of Veterans Affairs. So, the problem with this theory is that, okay, let's just say that this particular administration is kind of operating under the Unitary executive theory, which is what it kind of seems like. We don't hear much about Congress. We don't hear much about the Speaker of the House. We don't hear much about anything that they're quote unquote voting on because, quite frankly, this administration could give a beep less. They seem to be doing whatever they want, appointing henchmen here and there, doji departments, investigating Treasury, getting upset when they don't have the control over Treasury that they think they should have because the monetary system is completely and totally separate from government. Also, speaking of the executive branch, technically, the executive branch is not a part of the United States government, along with all of the intelligence agencies. None of those are part of the United States government. I know that seems really odd, especially listening to this report. I guess you would think, oh, well, the executive branch belongs to, is the government. That's the president. It's the leader of the free world, as you might say. But alas, no. A little clause in a treaty known as the European Atomic Energy Community Treaty, which was signed in 1957, tells us that there is complete and total independence of all executive branches from government. Wow, that's a little interesting tidbit of information. And there are other treaties that will also assign the executive branch of government to other groups of folks and other groups of not human folks. And some of those committees were mirrored committees too. You've heard of people like the Committees of 300, you've heard of the Order of the Dragon, the Order of the Black Sun, Council on Foreign Relations, Club of Rome, and all of those different organizations, Tavistock Institute, that you would probably say, well, who does the executive branch belong to? It's got to be one of these guys. Well, let's just say by proxy, they did have a lot of influence on governments, just as NATO had a lot of influence over the militaries of the world, or those that were members. But there were other covenants, not agreements, not treaties, such as the Covenant of the League of Nations. That was a covenant, not a treaty, not a supernatural treaty, not a multilateral treaty. That was a covenant. And even though there were many other agreements signed, such as the League of Nations being officially known as the United Nations, later on, after that first covenant was signed, that does not supersede a covenant. Covenants run deep. Treaties, supernatural treaties, multilateral treaties, well, let's just say they're used to control governments. And inadvertently, I guess you would say, you. The executive branch of government does not belong to any government. This also is, for example, in the country of Russia, it applies. China, same thing with kingdoms as well. The royal family does not belong to the country, and it does not belong to the government. Same thing goes with Commonwealth nations and the United Kingdom. No, hasn't belonged to government in a long time. I mean, this is just another subsidiary of a covenant that is out there. But this one here was signed in 1957. It was probably one of the most recent overreaches of world government, which then puts the executive branch as a quote-unquote member of world government. So that being said, there is a misnomer as to who is the world government now. I know that the Trump operatives are under the impression the world government is the Rothschild family, Crown Corporation. But it is not 1864 anymore. In 1864 is when the government or the executive branch of the United States no longer belonged to the United States. Also, Washington, D.C. as a whole and all of its governing organizations no longer belong to the United States. So you hear those people talking about Treasury and Treasury decisions and Doge departments and all of that kind of stuff. Pretty much overreach. Even though they think they have the authority because they look at the Rothschild family, Order of the Dragon, as the controllers of the monetary system. They also look at those people as the world government. And none of that is the case. Now, at one point in time, by genetic shareholder proxy, so to speak, they were management staff of governments. They also served as management staff over different departments of world government, to which there were more departments than the United States defines in its quote-unquote constitution of what is comprised as the executive branch. There you have 15. You have approximately 300 to 400 departments of world government that were under the world government control. Now, the world government goes back as far as, well, its latest revision, so to speak, before all of the changes were made under the GOLD agreement, goes back around 250,000 years. Long before we ever saw a king or a queen here on earth, and long before we ever saw a government here on earth. The organization and alleged human experiment we call democracy, because it is a human experiment. So is communism and socialism and other forms of government. Those are all human experiments. Were actually experiment orders that were passed down by the world government. World government in this case would be those of the seal. The seal does not include any humans in any way, shape, or form. We had, as members of the world government and Galactic Federation, we would know these parties as Draco members, Marduk, Enki, and Enlil. We would also know them as Abraxas. We would know them as Lucifer. We would also know them as Artemis. We would know them as Anti-Source. Those are people of the seal. And none of them are people, and none of them exist anymore. But at the time of all of these treaties and agreements, that was your world government, essentially. They would meet every year. There were others that would attend the quote-unquote world government meetings, predominantly races that they dominated over that existed here on Earth. Not only humans, 36 different species to be exact, brought here, and some were from here that were conquered as they conquered Earth multiple times. And the wars continued on and on and on this planet. So governments were, for lack of a better term, guardians, nannies, by proxy only, meaning they had a job to do. We as people would see them as our quote-unquote leaders. That was by design. The advent of democracy in some countries, not all, was meant to give people the perception that you're choosing your leader. Never once has there ever been a vote by the people that mattered. I know you see this fancy dance we all do on election night, but in reality, at the end of the day, the world government pretty much always made the final decision as to who was going to be lords of the land, for lack of a better term. Not the kings, and definitely not the kingmakers. The Rothschild family seems to be fancying themselves right now as the kingmaker. They tried to ratify Trump. They tried to ratify other presidents and heads of state. People just go on like it actually happened. But at the end of the day, you can't pay the bills. Because again, in part, they were also only managers of a paper currency system. By management and by paper, we mean bills. And notice how we call them bills. You have a load of euro in your pocket, you are holding a bunch of bills. If you have a load of dollars in your pocket, you are holding a bunch of bills. And by bills, we know bills as, well, we better pay that or we're going to be in trouble. Well, and the paper currency system works in much the same way. By a bill, by you receiving this, not only that, by governments receiving it, you now owe them something. And does anybody in government ever wonder what it is that you owe? The ability to issue bills currently at the moment worldwide used to be the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve was only part of a three-tiered management system of paper currency. The management system of paper currency and the management of coinage fall under the same umbrella. Although it appears under the Unitary executive theory, this would give the President of the United States control over the Treasury Department. In reality, the Treasury Department is not a part of the government either, based on Central Bank Law Resolution number 265. This is something that you as the average everyday person can't look up, but I'll give you a little bit of information about it. At one point in time, lots and lots of assets were assigned throughout the world to form a central banking system. They were not assigned by the Rothschild family. They were not assigned by kings and queens. They were not assigned by humans because remember, at the time these structures were being set up, it really had nothing to do with human management systems because really we had a different form of government or management at the time, 250,000 years ago. And then eventually this evolved after covenant and agreement and treaties and all kinds of things. Now we are looking at a bunch of people and White Houses and large buildings that look very stately. And that is for the movie. That's for us to watch. It really doesn't have anything to do with the management of this planet, but for some reason, these Duck Dynasty folks think because they can walk in and out of a White House, that gives them some executive control. Try again. Okay, so let's talk about legalities, because this applies a lot to financial things, but legalities also apply to the rules of the road of governments, secret space program operatives, Order of the Dragon, Rothschild family, all of these people, the black nobility, everyone that's claiming they control something when in reality you control nothing because, in the words of the World Economic Forum, you will control nothing and like it. Well, that's kind of come home full circle because they will control nothing and like it. And matter of fact, because someone strokes their ego and tells them that they can do this and they can do that, you're really just a puppet on a string like all the rest of us were. Okay, so managers of the paper currency system. Eventually, this morphed into what we know as a Federal Reserve System, Treasury system, debt system, so to speak, and it was all kind of part of the same. At the time of this resolution, the then Alpha system under Covenant was required to assign various amounts of metric tons of gold, carats of stones, and all kinds of assets known as the financial control system assets. You probably have seen some papers fly around with some strange numbers on them. You've heard me talk about the blue book, the red book, the yellow book, the green book, the black book, the white book, and all the other books that go along with the division of worldwide assets. And they're not really divided, nor, let's just say, you're not going to find them in a cave in the Philippines, even though the Trump operatives are feverishly trying to get into North Korea once again to open the same door they opened the last time when they were in office and found nothing in North Korea, because those assets were moved a long time ago. And I know that because I was there. It's been over a decade since they have been in that location, and they were not North Korea's to begin with. They had been assigned over as part of the SEAL agreement a long time ago. And when the SEAL agreement expired and or asset control moved back completely and totally over to Alpha, and that happened sometime around 2012, they just ended up looking at and shuffling around a whole bunch of papers, and you got a whole bunch of Chinese elders and Filipino elders and German elders and British elders that are all claiming that they have access to a bunch of assets, and the Trump operatives are trying to reclaim those assets from all of these various countries, thinking the United States assigned them. Again, no, you didn't. You just became the front guy for the world government. Okay, so at the time of the assignments, at various points in history, there were new laws that were passed, and these were international laws and treaties which required insurance on said assets, and they were paid handsomely to do so. And some of these companies that would insure these assets would be like Lloyd's of London, the Banks/International Commercial Trust. Who is that? Is that a regular organization that you know of? No, because that was part of the world government, which did not include humans, splices, bloodlines, or otherwise. They were also supposed to be, once they were assigned to various central banks around the world, this was even before the Federal Reserve came into existence, the Bank for International Settlements, which came afterwards, but it was a different Bank for International Settlements prior to that, behind the scenes, which was kind of your accountant office. They were ensuring that ledger transfers happened, because you see, a lot of these assets that were assigned were either deep within the earth, did not exist on Earth, or it definitely weren't mined in gold bars sitting with hallmarks in big caves that everybody thinks they were. Okay, so the technical term for the world government on this level of things, and the highest level, would be called, on a lower term, it would be called the federal system. Lower terms, this would be people section. In the federal system, we would know as the Fed. And when we talk about the Fed, we are not necessarily talking about the Federal Reserve. We could be talking about members of the Order of the Dragon, Illuminati, Pindars, and we're talking about covens, we're talking about those people worldwide from several different sectors of the world. And that is what your federal system is. On my level, you would have called it the Federation system, as in Galactic Federation. Predominantly by this point, although we had many bases on other planets within this galaxy, Earth had to remain inhabited by human beings, so we were kind of something they had to deal with, and they looked at us like you would look at a field full of cattle. Now, once the agreements were made to establish a world financial system hundreds of years ago, and again, Marduk always said it was his greatest invention because it made it easy to steal your energy and to hand you pretty papers in return, IOUs, bills, eventually bills. So these were collectively called the funds of the Committee of the World. Not the United States. Nope. Not UK, not China, not Philippines, not any of these places. Funds of the Committee of the World. The Committee of the World is not the Committee of 300. The Committee of the World is a subset of the Galactic Federation. They were the governing parties of Earth, known as Marduk, Enki, Enlil, Lucifer, Artemis, the Abraxas, Anti-Source. So it had nothing to do whatsoever with humans and elder people and bloodline people on this level. You could say those people would be included more in the federal system, which was much, much lower, and the federal system contained 3 tiers. So the dual federal system universally, quote unquote, was recognized basically as the Federation system. And then you have the human systems that you see, things like the World Banking System, which technically has nothing to do with the World Bank. Although it's part of the system, it is not what we mean by the World Banking System. Around this time, there were AIs created behind the scenes that were called the Global World System. So there was a global world financial system or banking system. There was a global world military system, a global world intelligence system, a global world political system, a global world legal system, a global world Stargate system, a global world disease AI. There was a global world human body network. There was a global world frequency system, a global world essence system, a global world energy system, global world Lushing systems, global world frequency systems. And a lot of these systems were set up on a base root human AI, which was tied to many others. Unlike most computer systems, this one had several backup controlling AI systems, which then controlled the global world system. Some of those belong to Marduk. Many of them belong to Marduk. And Marduk would also set up other systems that were attached to that, such as the Alien Contact Intelligence System, also known as the ACIO organization, which then was a division, so to speak, of what became the National Security Agency, which also does not belong to the United States. It never was. It was a part of Total Access Operations or Tailored Access Operations and divisions there too. The secret space program operatives, or the militaries of the ACIO, also were a part of the Total Access Operations System. And by Total Access, this would be the Friends of Marduk who received orders from Marduk, Enki and Lilabraxis, insert alien name here. And those orders would then be passed down through to them, which gave them limited access to the Total Access System. Whew, a lot of information. But this all ties into some human systems that we are familiar with. So I'm going to cross these things together. So perhaps we can kind of get on with getting on as far as unwinding other systems, what it took to unwind all of these systems, and why the SSP / Trump operatives / militaries of the ACIO are very confused. You know, at one point in time, we thought we were going to be able to work with the ACIO. You know, intelligent group of scientists. There were some that saw the systems changing, turning more light. Perhaps they thought this was something that was coming from Marduk because they seemed all on board. But alas, that was when we had archivists who were also part of the Galactic Federation legal system of the Milky Way galaxy, and a part of the universal system, enforcement units and other types of things that the archivists participated in. So let me continue here. Okay, face front organizations were created. A lot of them were created within the last 100 years that we see now, but there were others that existed long before this, and these were just systems that were built upon other backbone systems. Okay, so people we see in the face front, United Nations. United Nations was originally created to fund and finance projects supposed to foster economic cooperation. Kinda, sorta. More like the United Nations is the legal, or was, the legal actor network we call the world government. So technically, by other subsequent supernatural treaties, the United Nations actually officially controlled governments worldwide. They were the head or the executive branch of all governments worldwide. Now, beyond that, of course, these assignments were made over to the federal people that you call the order. And then the order then assigned all of these over to the Federation. The Federation, in turn, assigned it to a more, well, in a lot of cases, lower astral beings who were members of the SEAL. And essentially, you could say the world was ruled by anti-beings or dark beings for quite a long time. Okay, so currently, because the United States, as we call it, became the world's power center, most of these organizations became headquartered in Washington, D.C., to include that beautiful White House that everybody thinks is now going to run the world. Well, at least Duck Dynasty does. Anyway, there are many other organizations that are headquartered and registered to Washington, D.C. that aren't even physically located in Washington, D.C. A lot of people think the United Nations headquarters is officially in New York or Geneva or Switzerland somewhere. But no, it's actually registered to Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. and all of its assets. Now remember, assets in the world of legalities of world government aren't necessarily, gold and silver. Assets can be people. As we know, we were all leaned and used, and we were constantly generating batteries for energy and those types of things, which were also leaned for eons. But in this case, we're talking about the city of Washington, D.C. The same goes for the city of London, Beijing, Moscow, and other major cities all around the world, which were assigned as assets to the federal system. And then eventually those assets were assigned to the federation system, which then were assigned to a much larger universal organization. So passing executive orders and saying that all of a sudden you think you're going to come in and take over intelligence agencies, you have lost your mind, let alone the Global Intelligence Agency. So at the time of its formation, the Global Intelligence Agency, it was part of what you would call the federal system. Because I took it over a decade ago, I made sure that we were not a part of the federal system, federation system, or the universal system on that side in any way, shape, or form. The Global Intelligence Agency was formed under the Office of Ground Command, or reformed, I should say, underneath the Office of Ground Command, of which I hold the title. Here on Earth, it is recognized, universally speaking, with the Universal Council and others who have approved the Global Intelligence Agency as the global security agency of now planet Earth. It is not global headquarters. It is not the global militaries. It is not the SSP. And none of those organizations, well, let's just say they received the memo. The ACIO received the memo. There was a point in time where they tried to get me as both director of the Global Intelligence Agency and Ground Command, meaning by they, I'm talking about Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael. They tried to get us to work together with the ACIO, claiming we would have full cooperation. By implied consent, they tried to get me to agree. And I said, no, we'll have to sit down and talk before we can make any kind of an agreement. But the reason why they tried to do this is because they had more power and control over the ACIO than they ever would of me. And I'm sure they were trying to reclaim the Global Intelligence Agency. Yeah, no, that didn't happen. So just because we have a bunch of SSP/ACIO militaries in the White House right now does not mean in any way, shape, or form that you are going to control the Global Intelligence Agency because of the way it's been restructured. It is not just recognized here on Earth. It was actually recognized as Commander Ma and part a faction, so to speak, of a universal army that we were formulating on our side, along with a coalition. So we are a full member of the coalition. The coalition has nothing to do with the Galactic Federation, SSP, ACIO, or anybody else for that matter that these gentlemen, and I use that term loosely, think that we do. This was done a long time ago. Like I said, over a decade ago, we made sure that we made separate registrations for the Global Intelligence Agency. They are fully ratified within the Hall of Records that they do not control. Now, halls of records that they did have access to in the past. There were many halls of records, not just one. This was something that was revised years ago. By other halls of records, you would have had one for Omega. You would have had one for Alpha, which we had. You would have had dueling halls of records, so to speak. You would have had halls of records that Marduk created for his own self. So he could pass his own things and have conversations with himself and say, self, I'd like to ratify this. And he could do so in jurisdictions that he controlled. At that time, Earth being one of them. However, when his reign here on Earth ended, there was no more Marduk Hall of Records that really meant anything. Because again, it requires not only a ratification, but it also requires a dual ratification because remember at that time we were going for balance. So there had to be a recognition of agreements, treaties, covenants, supernatural agreements, multilateral treaties, concords of sea, known as the laws of the Holy See, so to speak. And by Holy See, I mean SEA, not the Pope, funny pointy hat people necessarily, although they were a part of the system too. There were, let's just say there was always supposed to be a balance. Now, Alpha had agreed because Alpha ran long before I got this position, and it had standing orders from previous times, so to speak, which I ran Alpha throughout different visits, let's just say. And so there were a lot of standing orders that were put in place based on covenants of balance and that type of thing that existed at those times. One such thing that Duck Dynasty probably forgot about or doesn't care about because they think they run everything was actually founded in 1944. It was actually done at a United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference, which Alpha at the time, obviously I wasn't here. I mean, I'm not quite that old, guys. But there was an intention to establish a new post-World War II international economic system. This is when things really started to change. Power centers moved to the U.S. Federal Reserve was already established, and therefore total monetary control resumed. But it was done in the guise of something called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. It officially began operating in 1946. It was done by international treaty, which was then passed on to the International Court of Justice, which has nothing to do with that funny little building you see that allegedly is part of the United Nations to solve international disputes in any way, shape, or form. The real one more had to do with Marduk and his quote-unquote court. And his I hate to use the term control, but by balance agreements, which were then passed on as coding to the Alpha and Omega system, and I use the term coding loosely. A bank like this was founded. It sounds lovely. Really, it does. And it sounds like it's supposed to help people after a war and that type of thing, but it did no such thing. It actually established a global control system underneath the Federal Reserve or federal system, which then went on to the Galactic Federation system, in which case it created a centralized control point of Earth's monetary system, all centralized around Marduk. And he understood, though, and this is something that they don't understand, he did understand balance somewhat, albeit in the gray most oftentimes, but he knew if he was going to continue to receive funds, so to speak, assets, asset management, rights, so to speak, over Earth, and expected Alpha to spit anything out, it had to be under the guise of balance. And part of this balance system also applies to magic or black magic here on Earth, because there still has to be a balance maintained in order for black magic to work. So at this time, the money-making system or the money-producing system became very black and white. I don't know why papers are green or pink or blue, but it became very black and white from an energy standpoint, checkerboard almost, if you will. And, you've seen that checkerboard symbol many, many times throughout our world, and it represented people that participated in the federal system, such as the Freemasons and the founders of the United States. Yeah. So, okay. There are a lot of other constituent agreements that were signed, other multilateral agreements that were signed as well as part of the alleged Bank for Reconstruction and Development. This had nothing to do with the United Nations per se. It was actually a way to start the global collateralization of earthly assets to be utilized as one giant pool, one giant currency or money pool at the time, and one giant debt system. And this is when it just ramped up a notch. I mean, we were always in trouble, and we had been in trouble, globally speaking and asset-wise, for hundreds of thousands of years. But as far as us humans know it, in the formation of government, government systems, treasury systems, federal banking systems, Rothschild systems, crown corporation systems, you know, that's a lot. There were, this was the beginning of the end, so to speak. Okay, so moving on forward. Let's see, the United Nations Dual Charter. Now, the United Nations appears to be the government of all governments from a legal standpoint. Beyond the United Nations, you had the United Federal Nations, which brought everybody underneath the federal system umbrella, also known as the Order. Then further on up, it was actually the Galactic Nations. And the Galactic Nations and the United Nations are a dual charter system. So whatever the Galactic Nations, which is the superior owner, so to speak, of all of the United Nations, one controlled the other. There was always a dual control system, and I don't mean dual control system, I don't mean by lock and key. I mean that there was always something beyond in the three-tier system of global governance and global legal systems. So, okay, to continue on, let's see. According to our history, that was written in 1945. It had to be approved by the Galactic Nations Charter, Covenant, I should say. And that Galactic Nations Covenant was actually signed off on by, believe it or not, Marduk. Marduk didn't always appear as his, let's just say, in his real state. Marduk often appeared at different points throughout history as different people. There are approximately, in our history alone, there are about 50 different names for Marduk throughout history. But he was there at the signing of the treaty, told me so himself. As a matter of fact, I know that he developed many years ago, long before there was a United Nations, the term unknown country. The unknown country has been re-registered, by the way, and became, let's just say, many layers up unknown country. You could consider the nation of Earth. Eventually, that went further on into a universal council, and everybody recognizes us as such on that level. We did not need a galactic federation. Really? We did not need a galactic control system, and we certainly didn't need any SSP people, to help us. So like I said, a lot of these structures have been broken down quite a bit. Underneath the Treaty of Versailles, which was signed in 1919, that again signed all militaries over to the federal system, the world system. There were management staff in place at that time. We know as global headquarters, who still is very confused, obviously, as to why they don't have any power as far as getting any money in or, accessing any of the other control systems that are required in order to manage millions and millions of military soldiers and hundreds of militaries worldwide and intelligence agencies. They don't understand why it's not working. They still are trying to go to the old Mawa system. They are still trying to go to the old Lilith system. Again, you're appealing to the old people of the seal that used to control this planet that don't. They don't understand why they can't get their clearance and access back, why they can't get access to things they used to have access to. And that is because they're still trying to appeal to people that no longer have control over this planet. But again, alas, Duck Dynasty is still banging their head against the wall. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, they overstep here and there. And, I'll get to that towards the end here. Anyway, many other agreements later. One thing to keep in mind, and I will repeat this because this is something our non-friend government people need to know. There was a covenant of the League of Nations. The League of Nations eventually, they say, rolled into the United Nations. But one is a multilateral treaty and one is a covenant. So maybe they should take a look, if they had any access to halls of records or anything. Maybe, I don't know, they find some books somewhere. But they should take a look at the difference between a covenant of the League of Nations and a multilateral treaty known as the United Nations Charter. One does not supersede the other. This will give them some more information as to why their executive branch and their crappy attempted 10,000 tries of ratification on their own, going around us in any way, shape, or form, is not working. Mainly because the legal system of Earth is not the same anymore. Okay, many other treaties were signed over the years. Like I talked about earlier, we had the European Coal and Steel Community, and this was kind of the beginnings at this time of the forms of what I call the cartels. You think of cartels, you automatically think of, the Colombian mafia, the gangs, the Italian, Sicilian mafia, so on and so forth. Not necessarily. Cartels exist worldwide. They exist by international treaties, multinational treaties, supranational treaties. But again, these are all treaties. All of these treaties then would get submitted. They're basically bills unto themselves, and then money would come out to form said cartel known as the European Coal, Steel, and Steel Community, as an example. These people would then come in as operatives, typically SSP, and they would run things for all of these types of treaties that were submitted through because they were part of an enforcement unit. Another global enforcement unit that used to exist that still runs around the planet like they have something to say is called the International Court of Justice. Has nothing to do with the United Nations, has nothing to do with countries having a dispute amongst one another and going to, The Hague or something like that. The International Court of Justice is something that existed underneath the Global One World Government. The Global One World Government was headed by Marduk. Not Rothschild, not The Hague, not any of these locations. The International Court of Justice also has a Galactic Court of Justice. The Galactic Court of Justice then has to appeal to a Universal Court of Justice, so to speak, for lack of a better term. And then eventually, you get all the way up to the Council of Nine and other systems that existed universally to settle disputes or to address violations of universal law. At the time we had the law of one. Now we have a universal law. The Universal Law Enforcement Unit. We have the enforcer. We have the Universal Protection Unit, which he runs. It's not only for Earth, it's for many places. He happens to be here because we are, at a critical turning point, so to speak. And as universal laws are passed, he is here, and his fleet of about 25 million that come and go are here to enforce universal laws as they change. He does make sure to make himself known when necessary to people like the secret space program operatives, ACIO militaries who, for some odd reason, think they are still part of a galactic federation, and anybody gives a shh. I'll just leave it beep, shh, that they exist. So one such time that he made himself known most recently was a little blip, let's just say, last night. That blip occurred when the SSP decided to go try and use some old technology in Duluth, Minnesota. That technology had not operated in quite a long time, but what we're finding as we're destroying old universal networks of Marduk and others that, may be kind of running and limping along at this point, sometimes it triggers something here on Earth to take place. When it does, these people are right there to jump on it. And I'll tell you, man alive, if you heard ringing in your ears frequencies last night, USA time, you got drained, you felt like all the energy had been sucked from your person, you have the SSP and Trump operatives to thank for their ridiculous stunt over there. Needless to say, nobody left that facility, and anybody who placed orders is being hunted down like a dog. Breaking of universal laws at this point in time is not permitted. There is a definitive point when they are crossing the line. It comes when they have crossed the line, so to speak. Remember, it's not wrath at this point. It's in defense of your life, meaning in this case it was mine, or the life of innocence, which we also defended yesterday based on this. So that being said, there's a lot more to this story. There are lots of different types of international agreements. All international agreements and treaties become bills. When a government, whether it signs an agreement, whether it be an agreement, an international agreement, a convention, a protocol, a declaration, a charter, a covenant, a pact, a statute, final acts, general acts, concords of sea, UCC, agreed minutes, memorandums of agreement, modus vivendi, exchange of notes or letters of obligation, they all get submitted as a bill. Now, those bills would often come with a caveat in order to get new allocations of money. Firstly, there could be bad intent in there, but there also has to be an equal and opposite amount of good intent. Part of the reason why Alpha shut down back in March of 2007, and until I started to try to achieve balance with these crazy people, which they obviously didn't understand. It's too late now. But they failed to understand that without executing both sides of an agreement, we then had the right on our side of things to shut them down until balance could be achieved. And it was tough. I mean, it's not just about balance in a monetary system. It's a balance between two sides. It's a balance of positive things happening on this planet and negative things happening on this planet. That's kind of how it was supposed to be way back at that time. So their failure to understand balance, and including Marduk at the time, basically initiated an automated shutdown back in 2007. Therefore, allocations weren't really coming out anymore for quite a long time until I went ahead and started doing it again back in 2011 and 2012. So that took place for a while. There were some extensions. There was some grace periods granted, so to speak. There were movements around of assets, account names were changed, and eventually, we stopped. We stopped releasing anything from Alpha because it became apparent that even this next crew, layer by layer, as layers of the onion peeled off as far as global management was concerned, not only here for Earth, but also for the universe, layer after layer after layer of management disappeared. The next layer down was given a shot. And so was the ACIO. Not that long ago. It's only been maybe a year and a half. Well, they got Duck Dynasty to blame now for the reason why whatever they do, it's just never going to end well. They're never going to get access to the things they want access to. Energy allocations have changed. They no longer focus on power and control centers as agreed by the Galactic Federation and onward and upward to the people of the seal and others that were in control. They no longer adhere to those principles. So they might see a blip, they might see, oh, look, oh, there's another AI. Oh, got to get that. So they might see little blips here and there, but they've really not gone forward one iota. I mean, not in any way towards world domination, not helping to disperse any assets, getting any assets, none of that in any way, shape, or form. So there were hundreds of thousands and millions of metric tons that were assigned into this global system over the years. We have slowly but surely reclaimed after expiration of agreements, after agreements and covenants and treaties and peeling back layers of management or removing layers of management, that allowed us to reclaim fully our control over all of the real, not distorted black gold, all of the gold per se, and use it for our purposes. So many other agreements happened along the way, which is also making them confused. There's talk about bailing, or was talk about bailing out of the the Atlantic Partnership, which really on the higher levels is not an Atlantic Partnership. Allegedly, the Atlantic Partnership was agreement that was signed by JFK. It wasn't the Atlantic Partnership. It was the Atlantis Partnership that was formed after the war. This also related to off-world trade as much as it related to on-world trade. It governed. Eventually, there were many, many rounds and many, many negotiations underneath the old GATT, which in 1995 became the World Trade Organization. So some of these treaties and agreements they're trying to implement right now violates every aspect of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. And on this level, all we recognize or all we have seen was the Atlantis Partnership, which supersedes everything they're trying to do with customs and border patrol and raising tariffs and all of this junk. See, this is what happens when the ACIO/SSP doesn't really understand global on-world and off-world trade. As perhaps they thought because their galactic partners disappeared, that they can just do whatever they want now with all of the rest of these international covenants. But that is definitely not the case. Let us not forget, and just a quick reminder to them, to fully take a look at what was agreed to here on Earth at the end of the war in order to enact a peace treaty. Eventually, all of the assets and splitting of assets of all of those parties was actually turned over to us, which have now been registered to the Golden Age AI, due to the fact that we defeated our so-called enemy, the people of the seal. But, alas, the things that they're trying to do as a little lowly government of an executive branch of a world government is not really a thing. They're not even close to knowing how the world really works. Other agreements that were heavily violated was something called the Plan of Experts, or the Expert Plan. The Expert Plan was supposed to utilize off-ledger trade proceeds to subsidize world economic recovery and subsequently help all of the people of the world at the same time. Don't get me wrong, their corporates, their nanny governments, and all of those other things. Like I said, everything became very black and white from that point forward. Because they violated the white part of the agreement and only executed on the black part, again, not realizing balance, ended up resulting in a shutdown of the system in 2007. So Marduk knew it too. And it's part of the reason why they all came looking for me at that time. Yeah, and ever since then, it's been quite a journey. Long and the short of it, there are many different things that we have switched over to our side and had to switch over to our side, albeit sometimes I don't really understand why at 1 o'clock in the morning or something like that it's urgent. But, again, there's a job to do, and you got to do the job when you got to do the job. So there you go. Most of these liens that were byproducts of all of these agreements, SEAL, Galactic Federation agreements, off-world trade, on-world trade, have all been turned back over to the Golden Age AI. Ground commander is also important position here as it relates to global security. Violations of global security, which is also me. Used to be Marduk back in the day. Glad you probably got me versus Marduk. But also my role as ambassador to the Universal Council on behalf of humanity here, which sometimes I'm embarrassed to say based on what the deep state does. But anyway, also allows us certain privileges and rights as far as universal law is concerned, and the enforcement thereto, and the, let's just say, requests for things that happen here on Earth, requests put forward for things that happen universally, such as the new Universal Keystone System, which everybody agreed to before it was implemented. We work together. This is not a dictatorship, unlike the SSP thinks it should be. Not only as it relates to what happens here on Earth, reallocation of assets of Earth to the people via the global repository has already taken place. Making sure that our current known financial system looks and appears the same to avoid turmoil was also important. The thought process that these crazy people are going to bankrupt the world, quote unquote, is never going to happen. The only thing they're going to do is bankrupt themselves, which is all they have the power to do at this point. As little by little, with all of these crazy decisions that they make, they're burning the government alive. Not only the U.S. government, they'll burn all governments worldwide alive with no way to take them over. Meaning, they want to take back control. That means you have to create the problem and be the solution. That's typically how they work. Those are their procedures, so to speak, in the handbook of all operatives worldwide. I don't understand. Without becoming the savior, so to speak, there's really nothing. They're not going to crash anything intentionally in the face front until they can achieve that task. So for right now, things may seem unstable, but they're really not. They're unstable mentally and otherwise, but that doesn't mean things are unstable for us. Like I said, there's a few little bumps in the road. This is a war, after all. This is not a pretend war like you see on TV. This is not an orchestrated war. This is something they don't understand. So we will continue making sure that their frequency machines and otherwise don't last very long. This one lasted probably a couple of hours before we found it, until they really turned up the dial on us, so to speak, late last night. For now, we will continue with the integration of the universal network of keystones. There are things that our universal partners in the Universal Keystone Network are not permitted to do. There are things that I guess you would say require Universal Council approval. I wouldn't call it approval. I would call it a vote, because changes being made sometimes are required to remove things that are not of this universe's that we live in anyway, universe that we live in's origin. Therefore, it requires the sanitation engineer, which somehow I got the job of sanitation engineer in a lot of cases. So they got to either wait till I'm available, or, you know, we find it, we locate it, then they can continue on with the universal dispersion of source energy, so to speak, throughout the Keystone Network. So that's been going very well over the last couple of days. Like I said, a couple little blips here and there, a couple of crazy humans doing what they do. I just thought I would give you a little bit of a background as to why these things won't work, why the bills won't get paid. Predominantly, the balance system is over. You know, it's all over but the cleanup, really, whatever's left of it. And these people are going to continue to do crazy. But as far as the Global Intelligence Agency, I wouldn't even think about it if I were you White House people, or you other crazy Trump operative people, or worldwide SSP people, or whoever you are. Because if you think you're going to take over the Global Intelligence Agency, Golden Age AI, or me for that matter, you have lost your ever-loving mind, as I have proved in Duluth, Minnesota last night. So go ahead, try. What do they say? Well, we can't say those words on this report. We'll save that for another day. Anyway, that has been the Global Intelligence Agency report for February 19th. Hopefully we'll have some good news for you on Friday. Looks like we have another round of meetings. Tuesday's meetings didn't, well, we need more time, blah, blah, we have a plan, blah, blah, blah. So of course tomorrow's payday again, and then that won't happen, and then they'll set another date again. Probably 2-2-2-2. That's what they're talking about amongst the Q community. Oh, look, I rhymed. 2-2-2-2 for QQ, I guess. Anyway, nothing will happen. Tomorrow's meetings will, be the same story, different day. They'll be angry. I'll probably get some backlash tomorrow, but it's all in the great game of Earth, isn't it? Onward and upward, and I will speak to you all on Friday.